David Quadrelli alongside Chris Faber here at the Meadow Park Sports Center in beautiful Whistler, British Columbia, here for CanucksArmy. Chris, day 2 of Canucks training camp has just concluded. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of takeaways away from scrimmage again. Some players kind of stuck out to me. I think Phil DiGiuseppe has had a really good run through scrimmage so far. He's a player who, did this last year at camp as well. I think he looked really good, looked like he could compete for an NHL spot. He's doing it again this camp as well, and I start to think of players who, watching the way the lines are formed with Nils Höglander playing with guys like Nils Amon and Linus Karlsson, players that I expect to see in the AHL. You can look at a 13th forward potentially being a Phil DiGiuseppe who scored a goal today in the scrimmage and honestly has looked good throughout drills. And Phil DiGiuseppe, a lot of people forget this. He is not like 5'8". Like, this is a guy who's like 6'1". He's got size. He's got speed. You could see that he's got skill. He scored the goal of the year in the AHL last year. Like, this kid is not really a kid. He's a veteran. He's a guy who's played NHL minutes in the past. Didn't get a shot last year with the Vancouver Canucks at the NHL level. I'm curious to see if Phil DiGiuseppe is the 13th forward coming out of this camp today.
You kind of mentioned it, the big story from day 1, Nils Hoglander, skating on a line with expected AHL players. It's a top 6 AHL line, so that helps a little bit, I guess, but were you at all surprised to see Nils Hoglander not in what people are looking at as kind of the NHL lines that Bruce Boudreau was putting out there at camp?
I don't think I'd be surprised. Coming into this camp, I was expecting to see Höglander potentially maybe get a go in one of the top 9 lines and, get an opportunity to maybe skate with a Horvat, maybe skate with, a Pettersson at some point. But the lines didn't change from day 1 to day 2. We saw these AHL players stick together. And I tell you, man, if this Höglander, Amon, Karlsson line plays together in the AHL, you are going to see ridiculous point totals for an AHL line, specifically Nils Höglander, who should dominate if he goes to that league. And does that help him develop? Because if the Canucks need another top 9 player, say something isn't working, say an injury happens, you have to go straight to Höglander at that point. And I don't think just putting him into the lineup just to have him in the lineup or keeping him at the NHL to have him as an extra body, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you can see this guy go down to the AHL, give him kind of just a checklist of things to work on. Give him something that you want to see improvement on in his time in the AHL and get him going to work on that. I think playing minutes, playing potentially penalty kill, do these certain things that you can do at the AHL level. You have a good coach there in Jeremy Colleton who has coached internationally. He's coached in the NHL. He's young. He's working on development. I think that's what we're going to see to start the season here so far from what we've seen from 2 days of training camp. But preseason games can make a big difference as well. So we could see how Höglander looks in preseason. If he gets an opportunity to skate on NHL lines, that could change how it looks. But up to this point, looks like he's on an AHL line at least through 2 days of training camp.
And Bruce Boudreau kind of spoke about the lines he was going to roll at training camp. He said, the only thing I really know is that we want Bo Horvat, Elias Pettersson, and JT Miller down the middle. But he's got endless winger combinations. So I'm curious to see before the preseason's over if Nils Höglander is going to be one of those wingers. The final thing on Höglander that I want to ask you is something that has been discussed a lot so far through the first 2 days of training camp, and that's what would it do to Nils Höglander's confidence to go down to the AHL? Because there's 2 sides to this, right? Maybe the initial send down isn't great. He probably wouldn't feel the best about that, but like you said, he's probably going to light the AHL on fire. So is it almost a sense of long-term, an AHL demotion is going to benefit Nils Höglander maybe more than he even knows?
The problem is, to me, is just he's had 2 years in the NHL. He's not had to be a minor league player in North America since he came here. He came here from the SHL. He jumped right into the NHL. He jumped into a top 6 role in the NHL. It feels like somewhat of a demotion maybe after 2 years of being an NHL player. I think that part might affect his confidence a little bit, but let's not forget how young this kid is, right? 22 years old still for Nils Höglander. There's still room to develop. We've obviously seen this management group be okay with kind of over-seasoning guys in the minors. And I tell you, I saw some of this on social media today. It's not that bad to have a sleeper in your AHL team of an NHL player. And I think this is something that good teams actually have. When I'm watching AHL hockey, I see players certain times, I'm like, wow, that guy should be in the NHL. And there's probably a reason why he isn't, and it could be something to do with the lineup. The Canucks might be able to have one of those in Nils Höglander. It's great to have top 9 depth, and the Canucks could have one of those players sitting in the AHL if that's how things play out.
And further to that, you just look at what Jim Rutherford-led Pittsburgh Penguin teams did back in the day. Again, like Jake Gensel, you look at how much time Jake Gensel spent in the AHL and now what he's become, right? So it is something to consider. We're approaching 5 minutes here, so we'll close it out soon. But there's more.
Talk.
There's more.
Give me some goalie stuff here.
I do love the goalie talk. So Mikey DiPietro, let's start there, okay? because Mikey DiPietro obviously requested a trade during the offseason out of the Canucks organization. He's here at camp. He's looking fine. I'm really curious to see, one, if he gets a start in the preseason, and two, how well he does in that start, and really what the future holds for Mikey DiPietro, because Patrick Allvin, general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, has said we're only going to have 2 goalies in Abbotsford. Last year they had 3. That allowed Spencer Martin, Artur Silovs, and Mikey DiPietro all to be on the roster in Abbotsford. But you saw different problems there. Like Artur Silovs there was a stretch of 2 months where he only had like 2 or 3 starts, right? And you don't want that for your young goaltending prospect. So I'm really curious to see what happens. Obviously with Colin Delia, and you would assume at this point in time, Artur Silovs kind of being the projected tandem out in Abbotsford. I'm really curious to see if we find a resolution to this Mikey DiPietro situation by the end of training camp.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to your goalie thing is, I tell you what, I don't know what it is about Artur Silovs, but he's got it. Like, he has that, when a goalie is scrambling, he still makes the save. He's just got it. You can see it throughout this training camp, throughout drills, in scrimmages, everything. Like, if Silovs can really push to be that starter in the AHL this year, you know, you're not even really worried about the DiPietro situation at that point, right? Because you have a younger goalie in Silovs who looks like he's taking huge steps, and what he's done in, whether it be young stars having the shutout in the first game that he played in, what he did nationally playing at the World Championships. Like, this guy's, 21 years old at this point? If he can push to be a starter by the end of the season in the AHL, you're laughing at what Artur Silovs has been able to do.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And further to your point, it's just he's so athletic, right? Like when he's dropped down on the ground, the way he's still able to move from his knees. We see a goalie like Igor Shesterkin doing that. Again, I'm not trying to compare Silovs to Shesterkin because I've been accused of that in the past. But Silovs is a very, very good talent. And again, like that's who you should be, in my opinion, worried the most about in terms of we need to actually make sure this guy develops, because there's been criticisms thrown at this organization for how they dealt with Mikey DiPietro during the pandemic affected season when they had taxi squads, right? So again, we kind of, I just went zooming by, we kind of saw the impact that it had on Mikey DiPietro not to play for a full season. I think the Canucks would definitely like to avoid that situation with Silovs. Moving to the NHL tandem, looks like Spencer Martin's job to lose as the NHL backup. And I kind of look at Colin Delia, the guy who signed here as a free agent this past offseason. I kind of look at him as being in the same position as Spencer Martin was in last season. And again, I spoke with Delia, and he signed in Vancouver because he wants to work with Ian Clark, and he really wants to have some structure and a cohesive package brought into his game, which obviously is kind of the same thing that happened with Martin last season. So I'm curious to see how much Delia is going to play down in Abbotsford. Obviously, he's with Jeremy Colleton, who used to coach him in Chicago. I am really interested to see kind of what the season looks like for Colin Delia, because I think he's going to start in the AHL, and I think the name of the game for Delia this season is to bring that cohesive package and become a much more complete goaltender. And what can you say about Thatcher Demko? There's really not much to say. Thatcher Demko was speaking with media a few days ago, and he said that this season, or last season, it was about becoming the starter, and this season is about becoming an elite starter. He wants to be in the conversation with those top elite starters in the NHL. Your thoughts on the goalie situation?
We've given too much talk to the goalies here. Let's wrap it up on this. Luke Shen commenting on getting the 3,000 hits. Our boy Wyatt Arndt, the stanchion, wants to see the 3,000 hits this year. Shen is only 160 hits away right now. He said maybe a pair of golden shoulder pads be presented to him if he gets to 3,000 this year. So I thought that was a fun little quote from today. But we'll wrap things up on that note, I think.
I think we need to make that happen. Dave Quadrelli, Chris Faber, here in Whistler on day 2 of Canucks training camp, here for Canucks Army.